A story is only truly lost when the last person who remembers it is gone. Elara was a young storyteller watching the last embers of her grandmother's beloved legends fade from her own mind. Each forgotten detail felt like a personal failure, a quiet tragedy unfolding in the silence of her village. This desperation led her to a single, terrifying choice. She would enter the Shrouded Glade, a place of ancient whispers and tangled magic she had been warned to avoid her entire life. It was said the forest itself guarded its secrets, testing the hearts of those who dared to listen. By the end of this journey, you will understand how a single act of courage can save an entire world of stories from vanishing into silence. What waits for her in that shadowed grove is a mystery, and what she must become to succeed is an even greater one. What do you think it truly costs to keep a story alive? Thorns thicker than her wrist wove a living wall before her, each tip gleaming with a faint, unwelcoming light. Elara's hands trembled as she reached out, the memory of her grandmother's favorite melody, a fragile shield against her fear. She hummed the old tune, the notes soft and unsteady at first, then growing stronger as the vines seemed to lean in, listening. They did not simply retract. They softened, their sharp edges curling inward like ferns in the evening dew, creating a narrow, temporary passage. She pushed through, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming nightshade. As she stumbled into the clearing beyond, a single leaf, shimmering like captured moonlight, detached from an unseen branch above. It drifted down, not falling, but purposefully settling upon the shoulder of her cloak, clinging there as if sewn on by an invisible thread. She was now known. The forest's awareness settled around her, a heavy, silent pressure against her skin, and she felt a primal urge to turn back, to flee the weight of its gaze. But the image of her grandmother's fading smile, the sound of a story half remembered, was a stronger pull. She silenced the screaming fear in her heart and fixed her mind on a single goal, the Heartwood. It had to be real. It had to hold the answers. The thorns snapped shut behind her with a sound like breaking bone, sealing her inside. And in the new silence, the myriad of indistinct whispers that filled the air began to twist and braid together, forming a single, clear voice that spoke not to the air, but directly into her mind. It knew her, Elara, it called, from the deep shadows where the oldest trees stood guard. The voice was a thread in the dark, and Elara had no choice but to follow it. It led her to a circle of ancient mushrooms, their caps glowing with a soft, otherworldly light. They pulsed in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, a silent drumbeat matching the whispers in her mind. She understood instantly that this was a test. One wrong step onto the dark, unlit earth between them would summon the pale, disorienting fog that coiled at the edges of the clearing, waiting. Her breath stilled as she watched the pattern, her heart thudding in time with the luminous pulses. A sequence emerged, a delicate dance of light. She moved with painstaking care, placing her feet only where the glow had just been, a step behind the rhythm itself. The fog rippled hungrily, but did not advance. With her final, correct step, the entire circle of mushrooms bloomed in unison. A cloud of shimmering golden pollen erupted into the air, swirling around her in a gentle storm. It settled on her skin, and the world dissolved into a vision. She saw a towering figure, a guardian with bark-like skin and eyes of deep, still water, protecting something precious at the base of a great tree. Then she saw that same guardian, wounded and fading, their essence seeping back into the forest floor. The story was a heartbreaking shard of a greater legend, and the temptation to lose herself in its beauty was a physical ache. She wanted to see the guardian's name, to learn what they protected and why they fell. But the vision was already fraying, a gift that was also a trap. With a wrench of her will, she pulled her mind back from the unfolding tragedy. She could not afford to be a spectator. She was here to be a keeper. As the last of the pollen faded, she clung to one clear image from the vision, a silver leaf pendant that gleamed at the guardian's throat. This was her clue, a single piece of the puzzle. The fog that had been held back by her success now began to thin, not retreating, but becoming translucent. In the misty half-light, she saw them, tall, silent figures of woven shadow and leaf, watching her from between the trees. They did not move, but their presence was a cold weight on her soul. She was not merely a visitor here. She was a part of the Glade's ancient, unfolding story, and every step was being judged. The path ahead, however, now glowed with a soft, silver light, beckoning her toward the distant, gentle sound of a weeping stream. The weeping stream's murmur was a chorus of 1,000 regrets. Elara knelt at its bank, her hand hesitating above water that was not water at all. It flowed with the consistency of liquid silver, and within its currents, she saw faces, heard whispers, felt the echoes of ancient joys and sorrows. This was a river of remembrance. The spectral leaf on her cloak pulsed gently, a cold anchor in this sea of feeling. She knew what she had to do. Finding a hollow reed, she focused her mind on the image from the vision, the silver leaf pendant, and on the idea of a feud resolved. She dipped the reed into the stream, and the liquid memory flowed upward. She drank. It was not a story she watched. It was a pain she became. The bitter cold of a grudge held for centuries filled her veins, followed by the searing heat of a sorrow so profound it threatened to break her mind. She was both spirits at once, one who had betrayed and one who had been wronged, locked in a dance of mutual anguish. The weight of their shared loneliness was a mountain on her soul. She felt her own self, Elara the storyteller, beginning to fray at the edges, dissolving into this collective ache of the forest. She was forgetting her grandmother, her village, her own name, becoming nothing but a vessel for this ancient grief. This was the true danger of the glade, not to be harmed, but to be unmade. In a final, desperate act of will, she clawed for a handhold in the storm. She found it not in resistance, but in the memory's own resolution. She focused on the precise moment the first spirit offered forgiveness, a fragile, blossoming warmth that healed a crack in the world. She channeled that specific feeling, wrapping it around her own identity like a shield. The foreign emotions did not vanish, but they no longer threatened to consume her. They flowed through her, and she understood them. As the torrent subsided, a profound clarity washed over her. She looked down and saw the spectral leaf on her cloak had dissolved into motes of light, washed clean by the memory's truth. She was no longer marked as an intruder. She was known now in a different way. On the opposite bank, two shimmering forms coalesced from the mist, their outlines shifting like light on water. They were the spirits whose pain she had just shared. They did not speak, but their gaze held a deep, quiet curiosity. One of them lifted a translucent hand and pointed upstream. The invitation was clear. Elara rose, her body lighter, her purpose refined. She turned to follow the stream's course, and the air itself changed, growing heavy with the clean, sharp scent of rain on dry earth and the undeniable presence of old, deep-rooted magic. The path ended at the base of a willow of impossible scale, its branches a tangled tapestry against the sky. This was the Canopy of Echoes, and every rustling leaf held a captive legend. Elara began to climb, her fingers finding purchase in the rough, breathing bark. The entire tree swayed with a slow, deliberate rhythm, a giant inhaling and exhaling that threatened to loosen her grip with every movement. High above, she saw it, a branch snarled into a tight, silent knot, its leaves dull and brittle. This was the fractured tail she had to mend. The physical strain was immense, but the true test was one of delicate touch. She had to untangle the story without snapping the branch, her hands trembling not from fatigue, but from the reverence required. How do you heal a story without breaking its bones? She worked with infinite patience, teasing apart the knotted fibers of narrative, feeling the faint, pained vibrations through her fingertips. At the weakest juncture, where the wood threatened to splinter, she knew a simple fix would not hold. Without a second thought, she pulled a long, dark strand from her own head. Wrapping it around the break, she whispered her own name, her grandmother's face, the reason for her quest, imbuing the hair with the substance of her personal story. The moment it was bound, a shock of connection, intimate and profound, jolted up her arm. The branch softened in her hands. She gave it one final, gentle straightening, and the leaves erupted in a chorus of crystalline chimes. The completed story of the fallen star flooded her mind, a brilliant cascade of light and loneliness that ended with a single, searing image, a crater cradling a gem of pure starlight, hidden deep within the glade. The tree, acknowledging her sacrifice, shuddered. A ladder of living vines unfurled beside her, offering a descent. But as she climbed down, she saw the shadows between the trees were no longer still. They coiled and shifted with a new, unsettling purpose, as if her act of healing had also sounded an alarm. The vine ladder deposited her not where she began, but at the mouth of a new darkness, a cavern veiled by a curtain of cascading roots. From within that deep earth, a low, rhythmic hum pulsed outward, a sound that vibrated in her very bones. The cavern swallowed her whole, its air thick with the scent of stone and ancient secrets. Its walls were not bare rock, but a tapestry of softly glowing runes, each symbol a frozen syllable from a time before memory. They pulsed with a faint, beckoning light, telling a story that begged to be awakened. A single firefly, its abdomen a captive ember, drifted lazily in the center of the space, and Elara understood. She had to use its light to trace the tale into being. Her first attempt was rushed, her finger guided by frantic eyes, and a heart hammering against her ribs. The cavern was closing in, the weight of the earth above her a tangible pressure. She mistraced a symbol, a sharp, angular rune for isolation. A deep groan answered from the stone, and with a crash of falling rock, the entrance she had used vanished, sealed behind a wall of rubble. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She was trapped. Her breath came in short, useless gasps in the suddenly stifling air. Then, the lesson from the weeping stream returned to her, not as a memory, but as a practiced skill. She stopped fighting the fear. She closed her eyes and listened, not with her ears, but with her heart, to the deep, resonant hum, that vibrated through the stone beneath her feet. It was a slow, patient rhythm, the very heartbeat of the glade. She let that rhythm steady her own, and when she opened her eyes, the runes looked different. They were not just marks, but notes in a song. Her hand, now calm and sure, reached for the firefly. Its light was warm in her palm as she began again, tracing the symbols in the sequence the cavern's hum dictated. She traced a rune for curiosity, then one for silence, then another for empathy. With each perfect pass, the symbol she touched flared like a tiny star, and when the final rune was completed, the entire wall blazed with a soft, white light. The story did not simply appear in her mind, it bloomed there. She was the first listener, not a mighty guardian, but a solitary figure who had simply sat beneath the oldest tree and offered not a voice, but an open heart. She learned that true listening is not about hearing words, but about feeling the silence between them, understanding the weight of a story without demanding its meaning. The wisdom settled deep within her, a fundamental shift in her understanding. The glowing runes then faded, but the wall behind them did not simply return to stone. It shimmered and dissolved, revealing a narrow, downward-sloping tunnel that had not been there moments before. A cool draft flowed from it, carrying the unmistakable perfume of damp earth and blooming night flowers, a scent that was both a promise and a warning. The way forward was open, but it led away from the world she knew, drawing her deeper into the glade's waiting embrace. The tunnel breathed around her, a slow, deep rhythm of sighs drawn from the earth itself. Each exhale was a whisper of forgotten tales, a current of air that guided her through the absolute dark. Elara understood immediately that her own frantic pulse was a dissonant note in this subterranean song. To breathe out of sync was to be lost. She forced her lungs to slow, matching the long, drawn-out exhalations that echoed through the stone. It was a battle against her own biology, against the primal urge to gasp and flee the pressing blackness. With each synchronized breath, a soft, phosphorescent light began to bloom at her feet, a gentle illumination that pulsed in time with the shared rhythm. The sighs, once restless and mournful, softened into a harmonious chorus, a whispered encouragement that coiled around her, urging her forward. The tunnel itself felt alive, its walls a judging presence that measured the sincerity in every breath she took. To pass through was to prove her empathy was not a tactic, but a true state of being. As she reached the tunnel's end, the whispers shifted subtly, their encouragement now laced with a grave new warning. The test of heart awaits, they sighed in unison, a final murmur that stilled the air. Before her, the passage was sealed by a thick curtain of living ivy, and from beyond its leaves, a soft, golden light pulsed with the steady, unmistakable rhythm of a heartbeat. The ivy parted not as a barrier, but as a veil, revealing a chamber of impossible silence. Elara stood at the edge of a circular room, where the air itself felt still and heavy, thick with contemplation. Scattered across the dark, polished stone floor were pools of water so perfectly calm, they looked like discs of obsidian glass. She moved to the nearest one and looked down, her breath catching in her throat. She did not see her own face staring back. Instead, she saw a memory, vivid and raw. It was the moment she had turned her back on her sleeping village, the weight of her empty satchel, a stark contrast to the crushing weight of responsibility she left behind. In the reflection, she saw the doubt in her own young eyes, the trembling of her hand as she grasped the fence post one last time. A deep, hollow ache bloomed in her chest, the loneliness of her quest finally given form. Was this bravery, or was it the ultimate selfishness, abandoning her duty for a ghost of a story? One by one, the other pools glimmered, showing her other pivots, other sacrifices, a mosaic of her choices that led to this exact, solitary point. The chamber offered no judgment, only the cold, hard truth of her path. To move forward, she had to accept it. Her voice, when it came, was a soft scratch in the profound quiet. I had to leave, she whispered to the reflection. The stories were dying with me. I chose to seek the source, not abandon my duty, but to fulfill it. The words were not a boast. They were a quiet realization, an integration of her past pain into her present purpose. The pool did not shatter. It rippled gently, as if her affirmation had been a stone dropped into its depths. When the water cleared, her reflection was gone. In its place, a path of pale, luminous stepping stones glowed into being, leading across a larger, central pool toward an archway of intricately woven branches. But as she looked toward her goal, her eyes were drawn to the dark water she now had to cross. There, in the central pool, fleeting shadows moved just beneath the surface. For a heartbeat, she saw the silhouette of a massive, horned figure, its form woven from darkness and thorn, standing guard before a gateway she could not yet see. The vision vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only a deep sense of foreboding. Steeling herself, Elara stepped onto the first glowing stone. It held firm beneath her weight. As she took another step, the archway of branches ahead shimmered with a sudden, sharp light, and the clean, electric scent of ozone pierced the stagnant air, a clear signal that the glade itself was shifting around her, preparing for what came next. The archway of woven branches pulsed with a light that seemed to question her very soul. Before it, floating in the still air, were 3 perfect orbs, each a swirling essence of a fundamental power. One gleamed with the hard, clear light of irrefutable fact. Another shimmered with the soft, captivating colors of perfect form. The third shone with a warm, resilient glow that promised dawn after the longest night. Truth, beauty, and hope. The choice was immediate and brutal, a demand for a single, defining allegiance. Elara's hand moved almost without her conscious command, drawn to the Orb of Truth. As her fingers closed around it, a profound weight settled into her palm, a gravity that felt both burdensome and deeply resonant with her mission. It was the weight of a promise, the weight of a world built not on what one wished were true, but on what simply was. The moment she took it, the other 2 orbs flickered, their lovely lights dimming into whispers of color before vanishing entirely. The sacrifice was absolute. A cold dread filled her as she watched beauty and hope disappear. Would her preserved stories now be barren chronicles, harsh and uninviting? A story without beauty was a meal without flavor. A story without hope was a journey with no destination. She clutched the heavy orb, her heart aching with the loss of the very things that made stories worth telling in the first place. Yet she held fast. She knew, with a certainty that went deeper than doubt, that a beautiful lie or a hopeful fiction would ultimately crumble. The foundation had to be unshakable fact, even when that fact was difficult or painful. Authenticity, not comfort, was the only offering worthy of the legends she sought to save. As her resolve solidified, the shimmering archway solidified with it, the ethereal light hardening into ancient, gnarled wood. Inscribed upon it now was a new legend, the tale of a keeper who had failed. This keeper had chosen beauty, weaving tales so lovely they enchanted the entire forest. But because they were built on fragile embellishments, they shattered at the first touch of a hard reality, leaving nothing but silence and disillusionment in their wake. The warning was clear. The orb in Elara's hand began to glow with a soft, steady light, but as she stepped through the arch, its radiance flickered sharply. It was reacting, she realized, to the faintest whispers of falsehood in the air around her. The path ahead was no longer a trail of earth and root. It was paved with smooth, dark stones, and each one she stepped upon whispered up at her, testing the honesty she now carried. Their question was always the same, a quiet, persistent murmur that echoed the one forming in her own heart. Why do you seek the Heartwood? She walked on, the orb's weight a constant companion, its light a judge of her every thought. As the trees lining the path leaned in, their branches bent as if listening intently for her answer. Her voice was a fragile thing in the grove's immense quiet. The whispering stones had asked their question, and now the ancient trees themselves leaned in, their branches curved like attentive ears, waiting. Elara felt the Orb of Truth grow warm and heavy in her hand, a silent command to be worthy of its weight. She closed her eyes and spoke her answer aloud, her words not a rehearsed plea, but a raw confession torn from the deepest part of her soul. I do not seek the Heartwood for glory, or for wisdom, or for any prize. I seek it because I am the last one who remembers, and I am failing. The stories are fading from my own mind, and when they are gone, it will be as if they never were. I cannot let them be forgotten. Her voice resonated with a strange, clear frequency, a vibration that hummed through the soles of her feet and matched the deep, slow rhythm of the grove itself. She felt terrifyingly exposed, her most private fear laid bare before these silent, ancient judges. Was her simple, desperate love for the tales enough? Was it noble, or was it merely the frantic act of a girl afraid of the dark and the silence that comes with it? For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then the trees began to straighten. A gentle rustle moved through their leaves, a sound like soft applause, a sigh of profound approval. The ground at her feet trembled softly, and from the soil on either side of the deep, shadowed chasm before her great roots uncoiled. They wove themselves together in midair, nodding and twisting with purpose, until a living bridge of wood and moss stretched across the abyss. As she stepped onto it, she dared to look down. The chasm did not show rock and earth, but a swirling, chaotic storm of images and sounds. She saw legends warped into nightmares, heroes twisted into villains, and endings corrupted into meaningless noise. This was the fate of stories left untended, a tangible sea of all that was lost and misremembered, churning restlessly below her. The sight filled her with a renewed, chilling sense of purpose. Her safe passage was a gift, an alliance forged from truth, and the cost of breaking that trust was now horrifyingly clear. She crossed the bridge with careful steps, the living wood firm and steady beneath her. On the other side, she entered a clearing unlike any other. The air was perfectly, unnervingly still. The constant background whisper of the glade was gone, replaced by a silence so deep and pure, it felt like a physical substance, a heavy blanket of quiet that seemed to absorb all sound, all movement and all thought. The silence was a pressure against her eardrums, a void so complete it felt like a physical weight. Elara stood in the center of the meadow, her own heartbeat a frantic, lonely drum in the immense quiet. Then she saw it. The grass was not merely damp with dew. Each blade held a single, perfect droplet that shimmered with a faint, captured light, and within each tiny sphere, she could see a flicker of motion, a hint of color. These were not drops of water. They were condensed sound, each one a trapped whisper, a fragment of a laugh, a single note from a forgotten song. To move carelessly would be to shatter them, to lose their voices forever into the hungry silence. Her breath stilled. She found a large, broad leaf and a slender twig, fashioning a delicate cup. With painstaking patience, she began to harvest the sound drops, using the twig to gently coax each one from its blade of grass and guide it into the leaf. It was agonizingly slow work. The silence pressed in on her, feeding a deep-seated fear that she, too, was being absorbed, that her own story would be erased by this all-consuming quiet. Every instinct screamed at her to hurry, to run, to make a noise, any noise, to prove she still existed. But she remembered the cost of haste in the Cavern of Runes. She worked with a slow, rhythmic reverence, her movements a meditation against the void. When the leaf cup was full, a swirling, luminous pool of captured audio, she carried it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. At the meadow's heart stood a simple stone basin, its surface worn smooth by time. She poured the collected sounds into its depths. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. A symphony of soft melodies, rustling leaves, and gentle whispers erupted from the basin, flooding the meadow in a cascade of resurrected noise. The oppressive silence shattered like glass. But woven into the beautiful cacophony were other, more distressing notes, faint, plaintive cries that called out from the edges of hearing. These were not just forgotten stories. They were legends in active torment, suffering in their muteness. Their desperate calls raised the stakes of her quest, from preservation to rescue, as the last echo of the restored sounds faded into a natural, gentle hum. A low, grinding rumble came from a nearby hillside. A section of earth and stone, previously seamless, slid inward and then sideways, revealing a dark, arched entrance. From within that new darkness, a warm, golden glow spilled out, carrying on a soft draft the unmistakable, comforting scent of aged paper and dry ink. The scent of paper and ink was a warm promise in the cool, still air. Elara stepped through the arched entrance and found herself at the top of a winding staircase, carved directly into the living rock. It spiraled down into a profound darkness, and each step was not merely stone, it was a page. A single, deeply carved word marked the center of every slab. She looked at the first step, where the next light, then fears. The words were not in any order she recognized, a scattered lexicon from a dozen different tales. Her instinct was to hurry, to leap down the stairs toward the golden glow she sensed far below, but a deep, intuitive warning held her back. This was not a path to be run, it was a text to be read. To miss a single word was to break the story's spine. She forced herself to slow down, to place one foot deliberately on the first step, feeling the cool stone through her worn shoes. She read the word aloud, her voice a soft echo in the enclosed space, where she stepped down, light, down again, fears. With each step, The words began to cohere, not in her eyes, but in her mind. A narrative thread started to form, fragile and shimmering, a bridge of woven moonlight. The story was about a spirit whose only fear was the dark, and who built a luminous pathway across a starless chasm. The urge to rush was a physical itch in her legs, a frantic counter rhythm to the slow, deliberate pace of her descent. She could see 3 steps ahead, a crucial conjunction, but the weaver and her whole being strained to jump to it, to get to the heart of the tale. But she knew that skipping a single, seemingly insignificant word like "and" or "of" would unravel the entire narrative. It was a test of reverence. She was not just a traveler on these stairs. She was a reader, an interpreter. She treated each carved word with the respect it deserved, speaking it clearly, letting its sound and meaning settle into the growing tapestry of the legend. The story built with every careful step, a beautiful, fragile construct of hope and light. She learned of the bridge's creation, its purpose, and its one fatal vulnerability. The final words fell into place with her last step onto the level ground. Silence unravels all. As her foot touched the floor, the entire staircase flared with a soft, silver luminescence. The complete tale of the Moonlight Bridge locked into her memory, not as something she had read, but as something she had lived and pieced together with her own body. And with that knowledge came a chilling corollary, a warning woven into the legend's very fabric. The spirit's fear was not of mere shadow, but of a specific, predatory entity that fed on such fears, a weaver of shadows who tangled narratives into knots of despair. This was the corruption she had felt at the edges of her journey, now named. The glow from the stairs faded, leaving her in a new, vast expanse. Before her stretched an underground library of impossible scale. Countless shelves carved from crystal and dark wood receded into a gloom so deep their ends were invisible, and upon those shelves, the books themselves seemed to breathe, their leather covers rising and falling in a slow, slumbering rhythm, as if the stories within were dreaming. The living library breathed around her, a slow, rhythmic tide of slumbering stories. Elara stood motionless, the Orb of Truth, a warm, heavy pulse in her palm, its steady hum a singular thread of clarity in the whispering chaos. Countless books murmured their own tales, their voices a seductive cacophony of adventures and tragedies, each one vying for her attention. A volume bound in what looked like weeping willow leaves promised her a tale of endless summer, while another, its cover of cracked ice, whispered of a palace at the world's end. To listen to any one of them was to be lost forever. She closed her eyes, shutting out the visual and auditory storm, and focused entirely on the orb's resonant frequency. It was a deep, foundational note, the sound of unadorned fact. She turned slowly, a human compass needle, until the hum in her hand intensified, pulling her gaze upward. There, on a high shelf shrouded in shadow, a single, unassuming book, pulsed in perfect, silent synchrony with the orb, the tome of the Heartwood. To reach it, she faced a treacherous climb. The shelves were seamless, but the floor was a landscape of teetering stacks, precarious mountains of slumbering volumes. Placing a foot on the first pile was an act of faith. The books shifted inside under her weight, their murmurs turning agitated as she disturbed their rest. She moved with deliberate, agonizing slowness, her hands finding purchase on leather and vellum, each grip a potential avalanche. One book, its cover warm as living skin, tried to enchant her, its pages flashing with images of a home she desperately missed. She ripped her gaze away, clinging to the orb's hum as her only lifeline. Her goal was more important than her safety. With a final, straining reach, her fingers closed around the tome of the Heartwood. The moment she pulled it from the shelf, the entire library seemed to gasp. The book fell open in her hands, but its pages were utterly blank, a field of pristine, silent parchment. Understanding dawned instantly. Without a second thought, she pressed the Orb of Truth directly against the open page. A wave of warmth flowed from the orb, spreading across the paper like liquid light. Where it touched, intricate script bloomed into being, alongside maps so detailed she could see individual leaves on the drawn trees. The knowledge did not simply appear, it unfolded within her, a cascade of revelation. The Heartwood was not a destination on any map. It was a state of being, a harmonious frequency that could only be achieved by locating and unifying three fragmented core legends, the foundational stories from which all others grew. And a cold dread settled in her stomach as the text revealed a devastating truth. The Weaver of Shadows, the predator she had been warned of, had already found and begun to corrupt the first of them. As this realization took hold, the map on the page began to glow, one specific area blazing with golden light. It depicted a garden not of flowers, but of crystallized light and solidified shadow, a place where the two forces waged a silent, eternal war. This was the location of the first core legend, the legend of the Sunstone, and the glow was not a guide, it was a desperate summons. The garden was a world cut in two. One half blazed with a light so brilliant it hurt to look upon. A permanent, captured noon, where flowers of solidified sunlight grew in impossible crystal lattices. The other half lay submerged in a cool, deep shadow, so absolute it seemed to swallow sound itself, a realm of whispering, velvety darkness. Between them ran a single, razor-thin line, the only border where the two opposing forces met in a shimmering, unstable truce. At the garden's heart, resting on a simple stone pedestal, pulsed the sunstone. It glowed with the gentle, promising warmth of a new dawn, a stark contrast to the violent brilliance surrounding it. To reach it, Elara would have to walk the line. Her first step onto the boundary was a shock to her entire system. The light was not merely bright, it was a physical pressure, a searing heat that threatened to scorch her skin and blind her mind with its absolute certainty. The shadow was not merely dark, it was a chilling vacuum, a cold that leached all warmth and whispered promises of peaceful, endless oblivion. Each force pulled at her, trying to drag her into its own extreme. Her muscles screamed with the strain of maintaining equilibrium, her body a trembling needle on a cosmic scale. She felt her focus fraying, the Orb of Truth, a forgotten weight as pure survival took over. One misstep, one lean too far in either direction, and she would be lost to the light's fury or the shadow's embrace. In that moment of precarious balance, the lesson from the weeping stream returned to her, not as a memory, but as a practiced skill. She stopped fighting the two forces and instead listened to them. She acknowledged the light's clarifying power and the shadow's capacity for rest, understanding that neither was inherently evil, only absolute. She found an inner point of calm, a still center from which she could observe the warring sensations without being consumed by them. Her breathing slowed, matching the slow, patient rhythm of the forest's heart she had felt in the cavern. With this newfound empathy for the very forces that sought to claim her, her steps became surer. She did not walk against the light and shadow, she walked with them, her feet finding a perfect, steady rhythm on the impossibly narrow path. As she progressed, a miraculous thing happened. With each balanced step, the two halves of the garden did not retreat, they reached for each other. For a fleeting instant, with every footfall, light and shadow merged, creating a breathtaking twilight where crystal flowers cast soft, blurry shadows, and the deep dark was illuminated by a gentle, forgiving radiance. It was in one of these perfect, balanced moments that she reached the pedestal. The sunstone, responding to her achieved equilibrium, rose gently from the stone and floated into her waiting hand. Its warmth flooded up her arm, a soothing, vital energy that felt like hope itself, mending the ache of her strained muscles and calming her frantic heart. But the triumph was short-lived. As her fingers closed around the gem, a flicker of movement caught her eye at the farthest edge of the shadowed half of the garden. A tall, slender form, woven from the deepest shades of the umbra, solidified for just a heartbeat. It had no discernible face, only a chilling, focused attention. This was the Weaver of Shadows, and it had felt the balance shift. Its presence was a void that promised to tangle the very story she now held. The sunstone's warm light flared in her grasp, as if in defiance, and its beam shot out, not toward the light, but into the heart of the darkness. There, it illuminated what had been hidden, a narrow path that wound through the shadowy flowers, leading away from the garden and toward the distant, rising sound of a furious wind clashing against itself in a deep gorge. The wind in the gorge did not blow, it warred. Two opposing currents, one scorching and dry, the other frigid and damp, crashed against each other in a deafening roar, tearing at the very air. Below, the abyss was a churning sea of incoherent whispers, the final resting place of tales ripped apart and scattered into meaningless noise. Elara stood at the precipice, the sunstone warm in her hand. She knew what she had to do. Focusing her will, she channeled the stone's energy, and a bridge of pure, solidified light flared into existence, spanning the chasm. It was beautiful, a path of captured dawn, but the moment she stepped onto it, the clashing winds attacked. They were not mere air, they were sentient forces that howled with mocking laughter, trying to peel her fingers from the luminous rail and send her tumbling into the cacophony below. The bridge wavered, its light flickering under the assault. Her grip was failing, her body buffeted and bruised. In that moment of terrifying imbalance, she understood. A beautiful path was useless if it could not hold fast against the storm. Without a second thought, she drove the Orb of Truth directly into the bridge's surface. The moment it touched the light, the orb fused with it, sinking into the structure like a keystone. A wave of unwavering stability radiated outward. The bridge ceased its trembling, becoming an immovable fact in the chaotic air. The howling winds redoubled their fury, but they could no longer shake the path. She had sacrificed her compass, her one sure defense against falsehood, to create an unshakable foundation. She crossed the now solid bridge, each step a farewell to the weight she had carried for so long. On the far side, she turned to look back. The bridge of light remained, a permanent fixture in the gorge, the orb visible at its center like a steadfast heart. It was no longer hers, but it was now part of the glade's enduring truth. This loss left her feeling exposed, vulnerable to the whispers and illusions she knew awaited her. Her reward and her next trial stood just before her. Growing from a crack in the stone was a sapling woven from pure silver light. Cradled within its slender branches was the second core legend, the seed of song. It was a single, crystalline acorn that pulsed with a soft, captivating hum, a melody of pure potential. But coiled around the sapling, a thorny vine of absolute blackness constricted it, its corrupt energy pulsing in a counter rhythm that choked the beautiful music into a desperate, pleading cry. The thorny vine was a parasite of pure silence, its dark tendrils tightening with every choked pulse of the seed's melody. Elara knew with a chilling certainty that no blade, no matter how sharp, could sever this kind of binding. This was a corruption that fed on noise and thrived in forgetfulness. The only weapon she possessed was memory itself. Her throat tightened, a knot of grief and fear that threatened to strangle her voice before she could even find it. The lullaby her grandmother had sung was a fragile, fading thing in her mind, its notes soft and worn at the edges like an old cloth. She closed her eyes, and for a terrifying moment, nothing came out but a strained, broken whisper. How could she sing of comfort when she felt only a profound, aching loneliness? The vine seemed to sense her hesitation, squeezing tighter, and the seed's hum faltered. Desperation clawed at her. She forced her mind past the sorrow, past the image of her grandmother's empty chair, and reached for the feeling behind the song. She remembered the warmth of a hand on her brow, the scent of baking bread in the air, the safe, certain sound of a voice that promised all was well. She poured all of that love, that specific and personal love, into the first true note. It was not a perfect sound. It was raw and trembling, woven through with her tears. But it was authentic. The vine recoiled as if struck by a physical blow. A pure, unadulterated memory was a poison to its shadowy essence. She sang on, her voice growing stronger with each phrase, each note a thread of light weaving around the dark bindings. The lullaby was not a spell of power, but one of remembrance, and its gentle authority unraveled the corruption stitch by stitch. The black vine withered, flaking away into nothing more than bitter dust motes that were carried off by the warring winds. Freed, the seed of song drifted gently from the silver sapling and settled into her open palm. Its crystalline surface was cool, and the hum within was no longer one of pleading, but of profound gratitude, a resonance that flowed up her arm and filled the hollow spaces the tears had left behind. But the victory was a beacon in the gloom. The very air grew cold and thick, the chaotic winds stilling as if in deference to a greater power. From the coalescing shadows at the edge of the gorge, the weaver of shadows stepped fully into the physical realm. It was a shifting, unstable form, a silhouette woven from torn pages and misplaced words, its outline a constant ripple of fractured narratives. Where it stood, the ground itself seemed to forget what it was, flickering between stone and soil, an empty page. It had no face, yet its attention was a physical weight upon her, a promise of entanglement. It did not advance to attack. Instead, one shadowy arm lifted, a limb composed of forgotten prologues and ruined endings, and it pointed a long, slender finger toward the center of the clearing. There stood an ancient, petrified tree, its branches frozen in a perpetual scream of agony, and trapped within its gray, lifeless heart, a faint, final pulse of light struggled to survive. The weaver's offer was a hollow echo in the distorted air. Surrender the sunstone and the seed of song, and the path would clear. It was a lie woven from despair itself, and Elara felt its cold promise try to seep into her bones. Instead of answering, she raised the sunstone high. A dome of pure, dawn-like light erupted from the gem, encasing her and the seed of song in a sanctuary of unwavering truth. The weaver recoiled from the radiance, its shadowy form hissing like steam, but it did not retreat. It simply changed its tactics. If it could not touch her directly, it would unravel the world around her. The very fabric of the glade began to flicker. The trees behind the weaver twisted into grotesque parodies of themselves, their bark becoming the texture of torn parchment. The air filled with the screams of legends being rewritten, of heroes turned to cowards and happy endings corrupted into tragedies. False narratives, sharp as shards of glass, shot toward her dome, each one carrying a painful, half-remembered whisper of her own failures. "You are alone," the weaver's voice slithered through the light, a poison in her mind. "Why do you struggle? All stories turn to dust. All guardians are forgotten. Your name will be the next to fade." The doubt was a physical weight, threatening to bow her shoulders. The light of her dome flickered in response to her wavering spirit. To let it fail was to become another lost whisper in the weaver's collection. So she fought back not with force, but with remembrance. She raised her own voice, clear and strong above the cacophony. She began to recite the tale of the Moonlight Bridge, her words reinforcing the dome, each true syllable a stitch of gold in the protective light. She spoke of the first listener, whose quiet empathy had first heard the forest's heart. She sang a fragment of the lullaby that had freed the seed, her voice layering the authentic memory over the weaver's falsehoods. She used knowledge as her shield, each legend she voiced making her sanctuary brighter and more solid. The glade's unmaking accelerated in response. Patches of the ground simply vanished into blank, silent voids. The petrified tree at the clearing's heart, where the final core legend, the Heartwood sapling, was trapped, groaned in agony. The sapling's faint, struggling light, a tiny green star in the gray stone, pulsed erratically, dimming with every story the weaver erased. It was the soul of the glade, and it was dying. Elara watched its light gutter, and a final, terrifying understanding crystallized within her. She could not merely defend. Holding the sunstone and the seed of song was not enough. To save the sapling, she had to perform the unification the tome had described, weaving the three core legends into a single, unbreakable song of creation, before the last story was torn from the world. There was no more time for defense. The weaver's lies were erasing the world around her, and the sapling's light was a dying ember in the stone. Elara knew what she had to do, a final act drawn from the glade's deepest lessons. She knelt before the petrified tree, the screams of unraveling legends a horsing chorus in her ears. With a reverence that felt like a farewell, she placed the sunstone and the seed of song upon the barren earth. They pulsed weakly, their power isolated and fading. Then, recalling the chamber of reflections and the truth of her own path, she drew a sharp stone across her palm. The pain was a bright, searing shock, as her blood, warm and vital, dripped onto the sunstone and the seed. She offered up her own narrative, her memories, her very identity. This was not a spell or a trick. It was the ultimate gift, a sacrifice of self for the story of everything else. Agony exploded through her, a fire that burned not in her hand, but in her soul. It felt as if every memory she possessed was being unraveled and rewoven at once. She saw her grandmother's face flicker, heard the lullaby distort, felt the very memory of her own name stretch thin and threaten to snap. The terror was absolute. What if this was not enough? What if she gave everything and the glade still fell, taking her into nothingness? The fear was a cold void waiting to claim her. But beneath the pain and the terror, a deeper resolve solidified. She had come here not to take, but to give. She had chosen truth over comfort, empathy over force, and now she would choose preservation over self. She consciously released her grip on her own story, letting it flow out to mingle with the legends she had fought so hard to save. Her blood acted as a catalyst, a bridge of living memory. The moment it touched them, the sunstone and the seed of song flared with incandescent light. They did not just glow, they became liquid radiance and pure melody, flowing together into a single, brilliant stream. This river of unified power did not strike the petrified tree. It poured into the cracks that webbed its surface, seeking the dying sapling trapped within. A sound like a mountain's heart breaking tore through the air as the gray, lifeless stone began to fracture. Great shards of petrification sloughed away, crashing to the ground and dissolving into dust. Where the dead shell had been, a vibrant young tree now stood, its bark the color of rich soil and its leaves shimmering with a golden, living light. This was the Heartwood, no longer a concept, but a physical reality, its pulse a rhythm that echoed the first heartbeat of the world. As the Heartwood bloomed, its light did not simply illuminate, it healed. The wave of pure, golden radiance washed out from the tree in a silent, expanding circle. Where it touched, the weaver's twisted narratives unraveled. The parchment-like trees regained their bark and leaves. The screaming whispers softened into their true voices, and the voids of nothingness filled once more with the substance of the forest. The weaver of shadows itself was caught in this tide of restoration. It shrieked, a sound of tearing paper and final, futile defiance, as its form dissolved. It broke apart not into shadow, but into harmless, fading motes of forgotten words and misplaced punctuation, which were then scattered on a suddenly gentle wind, erased into absolute silence. A single, low-hanging branch of the Heartwood slowly extended toward her, its bark smooth and warm, pulsing with the same gentle rhythm as the living library. Elara's hand trembled as she reached out, her fingertips brushing against the wood. The moment of contact was not a collision, but a homecoming. The whispered legends of the Shrouded Glade did not crash into her mind like a wave. They flowed in like a quiet, deep river, settling into a vast and harmonious library within her. Every story she had fought to save, and countless others she had never known, were now organized and accessible, a living archive she could visit at will. As this knowledge settled, the glade itself transformed. The muted, shadowy light brightened into a clear, golden-green radiance. The air, once thick with ancient secrets, now felt fresh and vibrant, thrumming with a palpable, joyful energy. Colors became more vivid, and the very leaves on the trees seemed to shimmer with renewed life. Yet with this gift came an immediate and profound weight. The responsibility of being the sole keeper of this entire world of stories settled on her shoulders, a mantle both beautiful and terrifying. A quiet fear whispered through the newfound peace. What if she faltered? What if a story was lost because of her? She looked at the Heartwood, its light seeming to see into the very core of her being, and in that moment, all doubt fell away. This was not a burden she had chosen, but a role she had been chosen for. With a humility that stilled her trembling, she made a silent, solemn vow. She would listen with an open heart, protect with unwavering resolve, and share these stories so they would never again be threatened by silence. The frantic, desperate girl who had entered the glade was gone. In her place stood Elara the Keeper, a permanent and vital thread in the glade's own eternal story. Her personal quest was over, but her true purpose was just beginning. The leaves of the Heartwood rustled softly in a breeze that carried the scent of rain and blooming night flowers. Before her, a path of lush, emerald moss unfurled like a rolled carpet, leading through the now bright and welcoming forest, all the way back to the glade's entrance, which stood open and inviting under the clear, starlit sky. The mossy path felt like a living ribbon beneath her feet, guiding her steps with a gentle, knowing pressure. Elara walked slowly, her fingertips brushing the bark of a silver birch as she passed. The contact was brief, but it was enough. The tree's entire history blossomed in her mind, not as a chaotic flood, but as a serene and complete narrative. From a seedling's first reach for the sun to the day, a storm carved a familiar scar in its side. Where her fingers had touched, a cluster of luminous white flowers unfurled, their petals banishing a faint, lingering stain of shadow. Her every step was a benediction. A cracked runestone sealed itself at her glance, its fractured story knitting back together. A patch of brittle, brown grass softened into a carpet of vibrant clover as she walked over it, the legend of a forgotten spring now bubbling happily just beneath the surface. She was not just walking through the glade, she was healing it with her presence, and the forest responded with a symphony of soft, grateful sighs. Yet beneath the profound peace, a quiet melancholy bloomed in her chest. She understood now that a part of her would always remain here, her spirit intertwined with these whispering trees. The world of her village, of simple hearths and human worries, felt distant, a story she had once lived, but could never fully rejoin in the same way. The conflict was gone, replaced by a solemn acceptance. This was her path, and she would walk it without looking back. Her commitment was immediately tested. A low, pained whimpering drew her to the base of an ancient oak, where the tale of a lonely earth spirit was tangled in a knot of its own sorrow, unable to find an ending. Elara knelt, not with force, but with an open heart. She did not tell the spirit a new story. She simply listened, her new connection allowing her to feel the root of its isolation. With a soft whisper, she offered it a single word, not of pity, but of possibility. The spirit's whimpering ceased. Its form, once fractured and dim, solidified into a warm, earthen glow, and the story found its natural conclusion in a moment of quiet connection with the sleeping forest around it. The act cemented her purpose. The immediate danger had passed, but the deeper, more permanent responsibility had begun. The glade's vibrant future was now a trust placed directly in her hands. Ahead, the wall of thorns that had once barred her way now rippled, each vine curling back in a silent, graceful bow. She stepped through the opening and back into the familiar twilight of the outer woods. The air was cooler here, the sounds of crickets and night birds starkly ordinary after the glade's chorus of legends. She turned for one last look. The entrance was once again a seamless, shadowed thicket, but she could feel the Heartwood's presence like a warm, steady pulse against her back, a constant and comforting reminder of the world she now carried within her. A soft whimpering from a hollow log broke the stillness of the ordinary woods. Curled inside was a child, their face streaked with tears, lost and trembling with a fear so palpable it chilled the air. Elara knelt, her own journey still humming in her veins, and saw in the child's eyes the very silence she had fought to prevent. She did not offer empty comforts. Instead, she breathed deeply, and with the exhale, she began to speak the mended tale of the lonely earth spirit. As the words left her lips, something new and wondrous happened. The air between them shimmered, and the story began to weave itself into visibility. Tiny, glowing figures of earth and moss took form, reenacting the spirit's sorrow and its eventual, quiet solace. The child's tears slowed, their wide eyes reflecting the luminous narrative, their fear dissolving into captivated wonder. For Elara, this was the true test. Could the pure essence of a glade legend survive in the common air, or would it become a pale, powerless ghost? She poured her focus into the telling, ensuring every emotional beat resonated, not with spectacle, but with authenticity. She chose this particular story not for its grandeur, but for its gentle lesson in overcoming isolation, a direct antidote to the child's own lonely terror. Seeing the fear vanish from the young face, replaced by a dawning smile, was a confirmation more powerful than any magic. The story, now witnessed and cherished by an outsider, was no longer solely hers to protect. It had taken its first fragile root in the wider world. The child scrambled from the log, their earlier dread forgotten, already babbling excitedly about the glowing people in the dirt as they dashed toward home and a waiting audience. Elara watched them go, the shared story, a new thread connecting the village to the glade. She turned her gaze back toward the shrouded entrance, but the ancient wall of thorns no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like her own skin. The glade was not a place she visited, but a truth she carried, and her voice was now the bridge between its whispered legends and a world hungry for wonder. Her new home was a small shelter woven from willow branches and draped in moss, perched precisely on the border between the whispering trees and the quiet fields. Each dawn, Elara sat on its threshold, closed her eyes, and let her mind sink into the glade. This was not a casual hearing, but a deep, resonant listening, a mental touch upon the vast library of tales she now carried. She felt the robust health of the legend of the Sunstone, a warm and steady pulse, and the cheerful melody of the seed of song, harmonizing with the morning birds. She would feel for any frayed edges, any whispers of distress in the chorus, and with a focused thought, she could soothe them, reinforcing the narratives with her own unwavering attention. This daily ritual was the breath that kept the glade alive, and in return, the forest guided those in need to her clearing. A woodcutter, troubled by a recurring dream, would find himself taking a wrong turn and stumbling upon her shelter, leaving an hour later with a fable that settled his spirit. A lonely child would chase a shimmering butterfly straight to her feet, receiving a story of a friendly forest spirit that cured their isolation. She was becoming a legend herself, the woman at the wood's edge who knew the right tale for every sorrow. Yet the solitude was a constant, low hum of ache in her chest. She missed the clamor of the village forge, the shared meals, the simple comfort of a conversation that did not revolve around the fate of worlds. She ate alone, slept alone, and her only constant companions were the sentient, rustling leaves, but she never once questioned her choice. This quiet life was the price of her focus, the necessary condition for her sacred duty. The stake was eternal, a vigilance that could never end, for the threat of forgetfulness was a patient enemy, and corruption could always find a new crack in the world. One evening, as the last light bled from the sky, and her mind was adrift in the familiar tapestry of local legends, a new thread brushed against her awareness. It was faint, thin with distance, and woven from a strange silken texture she had never felt before. It was a story from a land of scorching sun and vast deserts, a tale of a lost oasis, and it was not simply resting in the archive. It was asking, with a desperate, fading voice, for sanctuary. A shimmering sparrow, woven from threads of golden dust and desert wind, fell from the sky and landed on the moss before her shelter. Its light was faint, flickering like a guttering candle, and its song was a raspy whisper of scorching sun and forgotten caravan routes. This was no local legend. It was a migratory tale, a refugee from a forest that had turned to dust, carrying the last memory of a lost oasis within its fragile form. Elara felt a sharp, instinctive clench in her chest, the keeper's protective hesitation. The Glade's ecosystem of stories was a delicate, balanced thing, each narrative a thread in a grand, living tapestry. What if this foreign thread, born of sand and searing heat, introduced a dissonance that unraveled the harmony she had fought so hard to restore? The fear was a cold stone in her stomach, but as she looked into the sparrow's weary, light-filled eyes, she saw not a threat, but a profound loneliness that mirrored her own. To turn it away would be to become a different kind of weaver, one who guarded silence through exclusion. Her moment of doubt passed as quickly as it had come. She reached out not with her hand, but with her will, channeling the gentle authority of her role. She offered a formal invitation, a keeper's welcome that resonated through the very air. Then she turned to the Heartwood, whose nearest branch stretched toward her like a benevolent arm. With a soft request whispered on her breath, a single twig, gleaming with inner light, detached itself and floated into her palm. She laid this offering on the moss before the trembling sparrow. The tiny creature hopped onto the branch, and as its feet touched the living wood, its faint light surged into a steady, brilliant glow. Its raspy whisper transformed into a clear, beautiful melody that told of date palms and cool, hidden waters. The story unfolded like a scroll in her mind, a new and vibrant thread of resilience and survival, weaving itself seamlessly into the Glade's grand tapestry. The Heartwood had accepted it, integrating the desert's song into the forest's chorus without a single note of discord. As the sparrow's new song joined the whispers of the leaves, Elara understood the profound shift that had just occurred. Her sanctuary was no longer just a preserve for local tales. It was now a refuge for all endangered stories, a library with its doors open to the world. This act of hospitality set a powerful precedent, one that would undoubtedly echo across the winds. Her responsibilities had just expanded exponentially, promising a future of both immense challenge and richer, more diverse wonder. The woman at the edge of the woods was now a curator of the world's narratives, and the first guest had already found its rest. A faint discordant hum, like a single string out of tune, in a vast orchestra, pulled Elara from her morning meditation. Nestled at the base of a young cedar, a patch of moss had turned a sickly gray, and the vibrant story of a playful stream spirit was caught in a tangle of sticky, dark threads. This was not a new invasion, but an echo, a single stubborn fragment of the weaver's shadow that had escaped the Heartwood's great cleansing. It was small, no larger than her palm, but its very existence was a poison. She felt a surge of cold frustration, a weary ache at the sight of this familiar enemy. The battle was never truly over, was it? The fight against forgetfulness was a war of attrition, fought in these small, silent corners. But she let the frustration wash through her, and then away, leaving only a calm, grim resolve. She would not allow even this tiny shadow to fester. Kneeling, she cupped her hands over the blighted patch. She had no physical sunstone anymore, but its essence was fused with her own. She focused inward, calling upon that residual energy, the memory of unwavering dawn. A soft, golden light began to glow from her palms, falling upon the corrupted moss like warm, gentle rain. The dark threads recoiled from the purity of the light, their sticky grip loosening just enough. Then came the delicate, painstaking work. She could not simply burn the corruption away, for she would risk scorching the innocent story trapped within. Instead, she began to untangle the narrative by hand, her fingers moving with an infinite patience she had learned from mending the Canopy of Echoes. Each dark thread was a lie, a whisper of despair meant to choke the stream spirit's joyful tale. She teased them apart, one by one, her mind a fortress against their insidious suggestions. You are only one woman. You will grow tired. The shadows will always return. The mental effort was immense, a slow drain on her spirit that left her feeling hollowed out. It was tedious, exhausting work, a constant battle against her own weariness as much as the external corruption. But with each lie she unraveled and dissolved in her light, the stream spirit's story grew brighter, its melody clearer. Finally, the last dark thread vanished with a soft hiss. The moss beneath her hands flushed back to a healthy emerald green, and the story of the stream spirit burst free, splashing through her awareness with a cool, refreshing clarity. The immediate dissonance in the glade vanished. The leaves around her rustled in a collective, grateful sigh, and the general whisper of the forest seemed to brighten, the notes more distinct and joyful than they had been just moments before. This small, diligent victory was a potent reminder. Her greatest weapon was not overwhelming power, but perpetual, unwavering attention. The threat was eternal, and so too must her vigilance be. The legends of the keeper in the glade had finally drawn a seeker. A young woman named Rowan arrived at the edge of the willow branch shelter, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and trepidation. She had followed the rumors of the woman who could mend sorrows with stories, and she carried a desperate hope to learn. Elara felt a profound shift in the air, the glade itself holding its breath as she studied the girl. The solitude she had guarded so fiercely was being challenged, and the weight of her knowledge suddenly felt immense and dangerous. To share it was to risk everything, for a single careless heart could unravel centuries of careful preservation. Her first instinct was to send the girl away, to protect the sacred silence, but the memory of the migratory sparrow and the lesson of the open library stayed her hand. The legends needed more than one keeper to truly endure. she gave Rowan her first and most vital test. The girl was to spend a single night just inside the glade's border, not seeking answers or crafting tales, but simply listening. She was to absorb the whispers without interpretation, to feel the weight of the stories without trying to hold them. It was a test of patience and respect, the very foundation of the first listener. Elara watched from the shadows as the long hours stretched on. She saw Rowan flinch at the cacophony of whispers, saw the frustrated twitch of her fingers as she clearly fought the urge to speak, to question, to shape the noise into something familiar. This was the moment of truth. Would the girl's own need to be a storyteller override her capacity for pure reception? As the moon reached its zenith, Elara saw the change. Rowan's tense shoulders relaxed. Her frantic expression softened into one of quiet awe. She was no longer fighting the whispers, but allowing them to flow through her, a vessel rather than a sculptor. She had understood that true listening is an act of humility. At dawn, Elara approached. She did not ask what Rowan had heard, for the test was not in the content, but in the conduct. She simply placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, and Rowan looked up, her eyes clear and calm, reflecting the forest's deep, patient rhythm. She had passed. The decision to mentor her was a leap of faith that felt like stepping off a cliff. Elara's greatest fear was not that Rowan would fail, but that she would succeed for the wrong reasons, that the power of the stories would corrupt a well-meaning heart. Yet she knew that to hoard this knowledge was to betray it. The legends demanded to be passed on, to live in more than one heart. She was no longer just a keeper. She was now a teacher, and the future of the glade depended on her wisdom in this new role. As she began Rowan's first true lesson, explaining the delicate balance of the core legends, the glade's whispers, which had been a chorus of observation, softened and wove themselves into a gentle, humming lullaby. It was a sound of profound approval, a blessing from the forest itself on this new beginning. A new thread, a lineage of tellers, was being spun into the glade's eternal story. Sleep was a gateway, not an escape. Elara settled into a trance, her breathing slowing until it matched the long, patient rhythm of the Heartwood itself. Her body remained in her willow shelter, a silent vessel, but her consciousness slipped its moorings and drifted into the glade's shared dream. This was not a landscape of trees and streams, but a realm of pure narrative potential. Here, legends existed as living constellations of emotion and imagery, each one a self-contained world of feeling. She floated through a symphony of joy, sailed past epics of courage, and skirted the edges of tender romances. But one star in this constellation was pulsing erratically, its light dimmed by a creeping gray fog. It was the legend of the glass-feathered finch, a tale of exquisite beauty and fragile hope, and it was having a nightmare. The nightmare was not of monsters, but of silence. Elara drifted into its dream and became the silence. She felt the terrifying weight of being unheard, the desperate, clawing fear that its song would never again find an ear. The finch's perfect, crystalline form was cracking under the strain of its own impending oblivion. To fight the silence with words would be useless, so she did not speak. She remembered the seed of song, whose essence was now part of her, and she began to hum. It was the same lullaby she had used to break the thorny vine, but this time it was not a weapon. It was a blanket, a gentle, soothing presence woven from the certainty of memory. She hummed the melody of remembrance, each note a promise that it was seen, that it was cherished, that it would not be lost. She was not mending the legend from the outside, but comforting its very soul from within. The gray fog of the nightmare recoiled, not from force, but from the sheer, undeniable warmth of being remembered. The cracks in the finch's form sealed themselves with liquid light, and its song, once a desperate plea, softened into a contented, sleeping murmur. In that moment, Elara understood her role on a level deeper than any lesson could convey. She was not just a restorer or a guardian, she was a healer. The psychological well-being of every story was now her concern, a dimension of her duty far more intimate and demanding than she had ever imagined. The risk, however, was a cold stone in her gut, even in this formless state. Her physical body, left behind in the shelter, was utterly defenseless. A passing predator, a sudden storm, even a careless human could have ended everything. She had to place absolute trust in the glade itself, believing that the forest that relied on her would, in turn, protect the vulnerable shell that housed her spirit. It was the ultimate act of mutual faith. When she finally pulled her consciousness back, the return to her body was a jarring shock of sensation and weight. She drew a deep, shuddering breath, the air cool in her lungs. Blinking in the soft morning light, her eyes were drawn to her windowsill. There, resting on the weathered wood, was a single, impossible flower. Its petals were not of cellulose, but of solidified, swirling starlight, and at its center glowed a tiny, perfect feather of spun glass. It was a dream bloom, a physical token of gratitude from a legend she had healed in the realm of dreams, a silent testament to the new, profound depth of her connection. The air on the anniversary hummed with a different frequency, a resonant thinning of the ancient veil that separated the whispering trees from the quiet fields of men. Elara stood at the border, her hands resting on the now pliable wall of thorns. Today was the Annual Convergence, a day of deliberate and careful openness. She did not cast a wide net. Her invitations were whispered, passed from one trusted soul to another, a secret shared only with those whose hearts had already proven themselves kind and open. A woodcutter who always left offerings for the forest spirits, a baker whose bread seemed to carry a secret warmth, a quiet child who spoke to animals as if they were friends. She interviewed each potential guest, her gaze seeing past their words and into the rhythm of their spirit, searching for any hint of greed or the desire to possess the magic rather than simply experience it. Turning away a hopeful villager was a painful necessity, a small grief she bore to protect the glade's profound sanctity from even the slightest corruption. For the shared legend, she chose not a tale of epic battles or immense power, but the mended story of the lonely earth spirit finding its community. It was a narrative of belonging, a gentle mirror held up to the villagers themselves, showing them that the forest's heart beat with the same needs and joys as their own. As the sun began to set, the selected few, their faces a mixture of trepidation and awe, stepped through the offered passage. They gathered in a clearing where the air itself seemed to listen, and as Elara began to speak, the glade joined her. The legend wove itself around them not as words alone, but as a living tapestry of scent and sound and feeling. They felt the spirit's loneliness as a chill in the air, and its eventual solace as a sudden, shared warmth that spread through the circle. They did not just hear the story, they lived it together, When the last note of the tale faded, the silence was one of deep, shared understanding. The villagers left not with prizes or secrets, but with a quiet reverence in their eyes, the story now a part of their own family lore, to be told and retold. The event cemented a fragile trust into a sacred tradition, yet the cost for Elara was immense. Channeling the Glade's voice for so many required a profound expenditure of her own energy, leaving her feeling hollowed, like a vessel drained after a long drought. She watched the last guest disappear into the twilight, their wonder a tangible echo in the quiet air. As she turned back, the thorns woven themselves shut once more, and the glade settled around her with a deep, contented hum, its stories feeling more vibrant and loved than ever before. A storm crow, its feathers the color of a thunderhead, and its eyes holding the calm of the deep ocean, landed silently on the moss before her. It did not caw, but opened its beak, and from it poured not sound, but a dense, complex legend woven from salt spray and the pressure of abyssal trenches. Elara felt the story press against her mind, a vast and alien narrative that her own land-bound consciousness could not fully parse. To truly understand this saga of leviathans and tidal guardians, she needed to do more than listen. She needed to become a temporary vessel. Placing a hand upon the heartwood, she asked for its aid, not to translate, but to bridge. A root pulsed beneath her feet, and a surge of power flowed up her spine. She reached out, her fingers gently touching the crow's breast, and her awareness dissolved into its own. The merging was not a gentle blending, but a violent immersion. She was no longer Elara, keeper of a forest. She was the endless, churning gray of the sea, the crushing silence of the deep, the ancient, slow pulse of currents that dictated the fates of continents. The legend unfolded not as a linear tale, but as a sensory overload, a symphony of pressure and salt, and the lonely songs of creatures that had never seen the sun. She felt the immense grief of a tidal guardian whose failure had drowned a coastal city, not in malice, but in sorrow. She knew the fierce, protective love of a pod of storm singers who used their voices to calm hurricanes. The sheer scale and foreign emotional landscape of the Oceanic Saga threatened to erode her own identity, to wash her away into a permanent, briny delirium. She was a single, freshwater stream, trying to contain the entire ocean. Her grip on her own name, on the memory of her grandmother's face, became her only anchor in the torrent. She clung to it with a desperate, silent scream, reminding the sea that she was a visitor, not a permanent resident. When the connection finally severed, she stumbled back, gasping for air as if she had been drowning. Her body trembled with the phantom memory of immense depths, but the epic was now hers, fully understood in its heartbreaking and magnificent entirety. The storm crow tilted its head, its task complete, and with a soft caw that sounded like a distant tide, it took flight, leaving a single, iridescent feather on the moss. Elara did not let the disorientation claim her. She gathered specially treated leaves from the heartwood, their surfaces receptive to more than just ink. With a stylus made of light and will, she began to transcribe the oceanic legend. As she worked, the symbols that flowed from her tool were not mere words, but captured sensations, the taste of salt, the feeling of a whale's song vibrating through water. The leaves absorbed the saga, and when she placed them in the glade's archives, they did not lie silent. A soft, rhythmic sound like distant waves now whispered from that section of the library, and the air carried a faint, clean scent of the sea. This single act irrevocably expanded the glade's purpose. It was no longer just a sanctuary for the stories of this forest, but a true library for the world. Elara felt the change not as a thought, but as a physical sensation deep in the earth. The roots of the heartwood seemed to stretch in that moment, not physically, but metaphysically, tapping into narrative currents that flowed across continents and under oceans. Her mission was no longer local, but global. The responsibility was immense, a weight that could easily crush a solitary keeper. Yet as she looked at the crow's feather, a token from a world away, she felt not fear, but a profound sense of rightness. The whispers of the glade now carried a new, complex harmony, one that promised both unimaginable richness and challenges from horizons she had never seen. The decision to write did not come from ambition, but from a quiet, chilling realization of her own mortality. One day, she would be a story herself, and the intricate knowledge she carried could not be trusted to memory alone. So Elara began her final great work, the Keeper's Tome. She did not use paper or ink, for such things could burn or fade. Instead, she gathered fallen bark from the heartwood and used a thorn dipped in her own memories to etch the words. The process was an excavation of her soul. She wrote of the Cavern of runes and the terror of being sealed in darkness, detailing the precise rhythm of the stone's hum. She mapped the weeping stream and explained how to endure its torrents without dissolving. She chronicled the specific care for migratory tales, for dream-sick legends, and for the fragile, crystalline stories that required only the gentlest of attention. Every lesson, learned in pain and wonder, was codified into practical, compassionate instruction. The greatest struggle was with her own narrative. A purely technical manual felt like a betrayal, a story stripped of its heart. Yet to include too much of herself felt like vanity. She wrestled with this for days, the thorn hovering over the virgin bark. In the end, she understood that her journey was the first chapter of the Glade's new age. She could not separate the wisdom from the woman who had earned it, and so she wrote it all. She inscribed her moment of cowardice at the wall of thorns, her near dissolution in the stream's grief, and the crushing weight of the Orb of Truth. She included her doubts, her loneliness at the edge of the woods, and her fear that she was not enough. She made her failures as vital to the guide as her victories, crafting a testament to resilience, not perfection. This honesty was the tome's true power. It was not a list of commands, but the story of a life lived in service, a map that showed the difficult, beautiful path. In finishing it, she performed the ultimate act of preservation, ensuring the glade would thrive long after her voice had joined the whispers. Carrying the completed tome into the living library felt like carrying her own heart. The shelves pulsed with a soft, welcoming light as she approached. She found an empty space, a niche that seemed to have been waiting, and she gently placed the volume inside. The moment it settled, the bark covers fused with the wood of the shelf, and the tome began to breathe in slow, deep rhythm with the other books. It was no longer just a record. It was a new, living legend, the story of the first keeper, now a permanent thread in the Glade's whispering tapestry. A profound and quiet peace settled over her, a feeling of work completed and a circle closed. Her life's purpose was now secure, a legacy as enduring as the oldest tree. The silence in the sanctum was not peaceful, but thin and brittle. Elara felt it as a cold void, opening at the very center of her being, a place where the forest's oldest memory was supposed to reside. She rushed to the Heartwood, her feet knowing the path before her mind did, and pressed her palms against its warm bark. The vibrant chorus of legends was still there, a symphony of whispers, but the foundational note, the one that gave all the others their structure and meaning, was faltering. It was the first legend, the story of the Glade's own awakening, and its immense age was finally causing it to unravel at the edges. It was not being forgotten. It was simply wearing out from the sheer weight of its own existence, like a tapestry fraying after millennia on the loom. To lose this story would not be like losing a single book from the library. It would be like pulling the cornerstone from a cathedral, causing the entire structure of narrative to groan and tilt toward collapse. The other legends dimmed in sympathy, their lights flickering as the primeval tale gasped for breath in the dark. The Heartwood itself seemed to shudder, its golden light pulsing in a frantic, irregular rhythm. Elara understood with a terrifying clarity that traditional methods of preservation were useless here. She could not simply recall the story or reinforce it with her will. This was a legend that predated listeners and keepers, a tale that had been whispered into the void before the first tree had roots. To save it, she had to do more than remember it. She had to join it. She had to become a part of its ancient fabric. Closing her eyes, she drew upon everything she was. She channeled the terror of the sealed cavern and the patience of the sighing tunnel. She summoned the empathy learned in the River of Remembrance and the balance achieved in the Garden of Light and Shadow. She gathered the weight of the Orb of Truth and the melody of the Seed of Song. She called upon the love she felt for Rowan and the awe of the migratory sparrow, weaving every connection, every sacrifice, into a single, potent thread of her own life force. Then she began to sing. Her voice was not loud, but it was impossibly deep, resonant with the authority of one who had earned her place in the story. She did not sing words, for the first legend was older than language. She sang sensations, the feeling of sunlight on the first leaf, the taste of the first rain, the profound solitude of a world waiting for a voice. As she sang, she felt a terrifying and beautiful unraveling within her own soul. Memories of her childhood, of her grandmother's smile, of her own fears and triumphs, began to spin out of her, not being lost, but being woven directly into the narrative threads of the fading legend. She was giving her personal history to save universal history. She felt the story's immense loneliness, and in response, she offered it her own. She felt its primordial joy, and she answered with the joy she found in teaching. She was not just restoring the tale, she was enriching it, adding the human dimension of love and loss that it had never known. Her body trembled with the effort, her voice growing thin as she poured the very essence of her identity into the song. For a heart-stopping moment, she feared it was not enough, that she would simply dissolve into the story and be lost, a forgotten footnote in a legend she failed to save. But then, a new warmth bloomed within the Heartwood. The faltering rhythm steadied and grew strong. The first legend did not just return to its former state. It blazed with a new Chinese letter brilliance. Its light now shot through with threads of silver and gold that had not been there before, threads that were unmistakably her. She had not merely preserved the primeval tale, she had become a permanent co-author, her life forever entwined with the Glade's first breath. As she slumped against the tree, exhausted but whole, the chorus of all the other legends swelled in a triumphant crescendo, each story brighter and more secure than ever before, anchored by the now indestructible first chapter. Elara the Keeper was gone. In her place stood Elara the living legend, a testament to the truth that some stories are so vital, they require not just a teller, but a soul willing to become the ink. The hum of the glade was the rhythm of her own breath, a symphony of stories that now felt as intimate and familiar as the beat of her own heart. Elara stood in the center of this vibrant nexus, no longer a visitor or even a guardian, but a foundational thread in its very fabric. Her own narrative, with all its fears and triumphs, was forever braided into the ancient legends she had saved, her presence a steady, reassuring note in the eternal chorus of whispers. The forest around her was no longer a place of intimidating mystery, but a living home. The rustle of leaves was the shared gossip of 1,000 tales, the gentle breeze a dedicated courier for new stories arriving from distant lands, and the weeping stream a quiet historian, its waters holding the gentle weight of every remembered sorrow and joy. She had not simply found a purpose here, she had found a family in the whispering trees and the migrating tales. Her home was not a shelter of wood and moss, but the entire, ever-expanding tapestry of whispered legends. In this eternal exchange of telling and listening, she had discovered the ultimate truth, that a story only truly dies when it has no one left to hear it. Her life's work was to ensure that as long as there are ears to listen and hearts to feel, the whispers of the world would never, ever fade into silence.